At 10 in the morning, local time, on Monday, April 27th, 2026, a Royal Air Force Atlas A400M military transport takes off from the only runway in 4,000 miles of ocean. The aircraft carries one passenger. He is a polar expedition tourist. He has been at sea for 26 days. 3 days ago, he developed a fever. Now, he cannot breathe. Now, the only military airbase in the central Atlantic has lifted him into the sky, bound for an intensive care unit in Johannesburg, 4.5 hours south. There is one problem with his evacuation. The world is not yet sure what is wrong with him. The ship he came from, a Dutch-flagged vessel called the MV Hondius, is still at anchor off Ascension Island, with 146 other people aboard. At least 3 of them are already dead. None of them are allowed to disembark. By the end of this week, World Health Organization microbiologists in Geneva will identify the pathogen. They will give it a name that has not, in the history of cruise tourism, ever been spoken in this context. Andes hantavirus. A virus endemic to the cold forests of southern Patagonia, a virus with no vaccine, a virus with no proven antiviral treatment, a virus that kills on average 1 in every 2 people it infects, a virus that has never, in any prior outbreak anywhere on Earth, been recorded aboard a ship. By May 2nd, the World Health Organization will issue a global health alert. 13 countries will refuse the MV Hondius permission to dock. The ship, carrying 23 nationalities and a pathogen the global medical apparatus is still scrambling to characterize, will spend the next 8 days searching for a port willing to accept it. But before we talk about the ship, we should talk about the journey. It began 4 months earlier, with a retired Dutch couple, a rental car, and a bird-watching tour to a landfill at the end of the world. This is the story of the MV Hondius, a polar expedition cruise that departed Argentina on April 1st, 2026, on what was supposed to be a routine 7-week voyage across the South Atlantic to watch penguins and albatrosses, to see Antarctica. The ship carried 147 souls, 86 passengers, and 61 crew, from 23 different countries. Most were retirees, several were birders. None of them, when they boarded in early April, had any reason to imagine that within 6 weeks they would become the central event in a global public health emergency. What happened on that ship, and what it revealed about a virus that has been quietly killing rural people across 4 continents for over 70 years, is the story we are about to tell. In November of 2025, a retired Dutch couple in their 70s arrive in Buenos Aires. He is a birder, so is she. They have spent decades chasing species across continents. By the time of this trip, they have, between them, recorded over 5,000 bird species. They are hoping to add a few more before they board the ship. They cross into Chile on the 7th of January. They visit the Andean foothills of Neuquén province on the 31st. From there, they drive east through Mendoza, then north into San Juan, then across the high steppe of La Pampa, then east to the subtropical jungles of Misiones in the country's northeastern corner. On the 13th of March, they cross into Uruguay for 2 weeks. They return to Argentina on the 27th. 4 months, 10,000 kilometers, 5 climatic zones, 17 towns. And then they fly south. Ushuaia, the southernmost city in the world, lies 600 kilometers south of the next nearest town of any size. It sits on the Beagle Channel, on the southern coast of an island called Tierra del Fuego, Land of Fire, named by Ferdinand Magellan in 1520, when his ships sailed past at night and saw the cooking fires of the indigenous Yamana people scattered along the shore. The Yamana had been living there for 10,000 years, surviving a sub-Antarctic climate with a layer of seal fat instead of clothing. Within 60 years of European contact, they were extinct. Not from war, from measles, smallpox, influenza, the diseases the missionaries and settlers brought without knowing they carried them. Today, there is one fluent speaker of the Yamana language left in the world. Ushuaia itself was founded by Argentina in 1884 as a strategic outpost. The country needed to consolidate sovereignty over a territory it was worried about losing to Chile, and it had no willing settlers. So, in 1896, it built a prison. The prisoners built the town, cut the timber, laid the southernmost railway in the world. The penal colony stayed open until 1947. Today, Ushuaia is a city of 89,000. Its tourism slogan, printed everywhere, is simply Fin del Mundo, the end of the world. It is the staging port for nearly every Antarctic expedition cruise on Earth. In the most recent tourist season, over 570 cruise ships docked in its harbor. The Dutch couple arrived on the 27th of March. What they did during the 4 days they spent in Ushuaia before boarding the MV Hondius is, at the time of this documentary, one of the most actively investigated questions in global epidemiology. 6 kilometers outside the city center, on a flat shelf of land between two ridges, sits a municipal landfill. The locals call it the Relleno Sanitario. It accepts about 150 tons of waste a day. It is also one of the best places on the entire South American continent to see scavenger birds. The white-throated caracara, the black-chested buzzard eagle, the southern giant petrel, the Andean condor, the largest flying land bird in the Western Hemisphere with a wingspan of 3 meters, which descends from the mountains in flocks of 20 or 30 to feed on carcasses the landfill draws. For experienced birders visiting Ushuaia, a trip to the Relleno Sanitario is considered essential. Several local tour operators offer guided visits. They drive small groups along a dirt road to a viewing point on the perimeter of the fence. They do not enter the landfill itself. They stand at the edge, scopes raised, and wait for the condors to come down. It is at this landfill, according to the leading hypothesis of the Argentine Ministry of Health, that the Dutch couple may have contracted Andes hantavirus. The hypothesis has problems. Hantaviruses are spread by rodents. They live in the urine, saliva, and droppings of certain species of mice and rats. Humans become infected when they breathe in air that has been contaminated by those droppings, usually in enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces, cabins, storage rooms, outbuildings. The Ushuaia landfill is none of those things. It is open to the wind. Visitors observe from the road, far from the trash, and the species of rodent that carries Andes hantavirus, a small forest mouse called the long-tailed pygmy rice rat, or colilago, does not live in landfills. The colilago is a vegetarian. It feeds on seeds and bark in the forests of southern Patagonia. The rodents that live in landfills are common rats, which carry their own pathogens, but not the Andes strain. So the landfill theory, in the view of several international virologists, is probably wrong. But the question of where the Dutch couple did contract the virus is, 4 weeks after the outbreak began, still unanswered. It could have happened anywhere across their 4-month journey. The incubation period of the virus is between 1 and 6 weeks. The Argentine government's Malbrán Institute has sent investigators to Ushuaia. They are trapping rodents along the couple's known route, testing them for Andes virus, looking for a match. By the time this documentary is finished, they may have one. They may not. In the meantime, the colilago lives where it has always lived. A small animal, 5 inches long, soft brown above and white below, with a tail almost twice the length of its body. It builds nests of grass in hollow logs. It breeds twice a year. It lives on average less than 12 months. It has been carrying Andes hantavirus in some proportion of its population for at least several thousand years. The virus does not harm the colilago. The two evolved alongside each other. They are, in a deep biological sense, the same organism. One a host, one a passenger, neither able to live without the other. When a colilago dies, the virus does not die with it. It persists for hours in the dried saliva and urine. Another rodent passes through, picks up a trace, carries the virus onward. The chain has been unbroken for longer than any human civilization has existed. Most of the time, the chain stays inside the species. Humans only become infected by accident. When they do, the result is among the most lethal viral infections known to medicine. But to understand why, we have to go back nearly 70 years. In the spring of 1951, during the Korean War, the United Nations Command begins recording cases of a new and terrifying illness among its soldiers. A soldier comes off patrol, feeling tired. He develops a fever. He has a violent headache. After 3 to 4 days, his kidneys begin to shut down. He bleeds from his nose, his gums, his digestive tract, his eyes. By the ceasefire in 1953, over 3,000 UN soldiers have been hospitalized with what the Army's medical staff are calling Korean hemorrhagic fever. 15% die. The Americans do not know what is causing it. For most of the next 3 decades, they will not know. Then, in the late 1970s, a South Korean virologist named Lee Ho-Wang begins working on the problem. He spends 5 years trapping rodents in the rice fields along the demilitarized zone. In 1976, he isolates the pathogen, a virus in the lungs and kidneys of a striped field mouse caught near the Hantan River. Dr. Lee names the virus for the river, Hantan, then, in transliteration, Hantan. Then, when the family of related viruses is identified across the globe in the decade that follows, hantavirus. The virus he named has, since his discovery, been documented on every inhabited continent except Australia. But the story did not end in Korea. It moved, in 1993, to a corner of the United States nobody had expected. In May of that year, in a region of the American Southwest where the borders of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah converge, the Four Corners, a young Navajo athlete in apparently perfect health collapses with sudden respiratory failure and dies within hours. His fiancée had died the same way 5 days earlier. By the end of the month, the Indian Health Service has recorded 6 similar deaths, all young, all Navajo, all previously healthy. The Centers for Disease Control sends a team. The team finds nothing. The Navajo elders do. In Dine Bahane, the Navajo oral history, there is a teaching about a kind of sickness that comes when the rains are too heavy and the pinyon pine nuts grow in unusual abundance. The mice, the elders say, eat the pine nuts and multiply. The mice multiply, and the sickness comes from the mice. The teaching is old. The elders cannot remember a time when it was new. In 1993, the spring was unusually wet. The pinyon pine harvest was enormous. The mouse population in the Four Corners region had exploded, a 10-fold increase according to wildlife biologists who went back later and counted. The Navajo elders met with the CDC investigators in early June. They explained the teaching. By the 16th of June, the CDC had isolated the virus. It was a hantavirus, a cousin of Dr. Lee's discovery, but a new species. They named it sin nombre, without a name, in Spanish, because the Navajo elders, when consulted, asked that the virus not carry the name of any place or person from their nation. By the end of 1993, 33 people were confirmed dead. 75% of those who became symptomatic died. The CDC would later acknowledge that the Navajo teaching had pointed them to the answer before any of their own diagnostic tools did. By the early 2000s, hantaviruses had been identified across the Americas, different rodents, different strains, the same basic story. And in 1996, in the cold forests of southern Patagonia, an outbreak occurred that broke the rule every other hantavirus had followed. The virus was given the name Andes, after the mountain range in whose foothills it appeared to be endemic. It was carried by the Colilago. It produced the same severe respiratory illness. But Andes virus could spread from one human being to another. This was, and remains, a unique property among hantaviruses. No other strain has ever been shown to transmit human to human. Andes does, through close, sustained contact, through shared sleeping quarters, through the intimate caregiving that family members provide one another during an illness. The largest documented Andes outbreak before the MV Hondius occurred in 2018 and 2019 in a small Patagonian town called Epuyen, about 1,000 kilometers north of Ushuaia. A single infected person attended a birthday party. Over the next 6 months, the virus passed through 4 generations of human-to-human transmission. 34 cases, 11 deaths. The Argentine government quarantined the town for 30 days. Schools closed, funerals were prohibited. The science of hantavirus is, in the long view, a story about how diseases hide in the spaces between human surveillance systems. They live in rural rodents. They infect people who work outdoors, on farms, in forests, in storage huts. The people who die of hantavirus are almost without exception agricultural workers, foresters, indigenous people in remote areas. People whose deaths do not, in any given year, attract the attention of the world's medical research apparatus, until they do.
Which brings us back to the ship.
The MV Hondius is a polar expedition cruise vessel built in 2019 at the Brodosplit shipyard in Croatia, operated by a Dutch company called Ocean-Wide Expeditions. 107 meters long, ice-strengthened Polar Class 6, capacity of 170 passengers and crew. The voyage that began on April 1st was a repositioning voyage, 48 days, 8,500 nautical miles from Ushuaia to Rotterdam, with stops at the Antarctic Peninsula, South Georgia, Tristan da Cunha, and St. Helena. 2 days after departure, the MV Hondius enters the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is the body of water between the southern tip of South America and the northern coast of Antarctica. It is 600 miles wide. It is, by most measures, the roughest stretch of ocean on Earth, the only place on the planet where wind and current can travel uninterrupted around the entire Southern Ocean before being squeezed through the gap between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula. Wave heights of 15 meters are routine. The Hondius is built for this. The passengers, as they enter the Drake on the evening of the 3rd, are mostly seasick. A few are exhilarated. Some are watching for petrels and albatrosses in the spray. Among them is the 70-year-old Dutch husband. He is feeling tired. He attributes it to the crossing. On the 5th of April, 2 days into the Drake, he develops a fever. He thinks he has caught a cold. By the 6th, he is worse. His wife brings him to the infirmary. The onboard physician records his symptoms: temperature 39.1, low blood pressure, and prescribes paracetamol, fluids, rest. The differential diagnosis at this point is a viral upper respiratory infection. By the 8th, the ship has cleared the Drake and is approaching the Antarctic Peninsula. The husband cannot keep food down. His breathing has become labored. The physician escalates. Oxygen, a telemedicine link to Punta Arenas. By the morning of the 11th, evacuation has become impossible. The ship is 4 days past Cape Horn. No port within reach. No helicopter can fly the distance. At 10:48 on the evening of the 11th of April, the 70-year-old Dutch husband dies in the infirmary of the MV Hondius. He has been at sea for 10 days. The cause of death is recorded as acute respiratory failure of unknown viral etiology. His wife is with him. She is, by this point, beginning to feel unwell. The ship cannot turn back. The expedition is past any practical retreat. The captain consults with Oceanwide's Operations Center. The decision is made to continue the itinerary, with the body kept in the small mortuary refrigeration and the widow given private quarters and monitoring. The ship continues south, to the Antarctic Peninsula, to the icebergs the passengers have come to see. The Antarctic Peninsula, in early April, is at the end of its summer season. The penguin colonies, Gentoo, Adelie, Chinstrap, are finishing their breeding cycles. The orcas are still patrolling the channels. The expedition guides do their work. They take passengers ashore in zodiacs. They point out leopard seals on the ice floes. The passengers, by this point, are aware that something has happened. The husband's death has been announced. A subdued mood has settled over the vessel. The wandering albatross has the longest wingspan of any bird in the world, 3.5 meters, tip to tip. It can fly for hours without flapping. It drinks salt water and excretes the salt from glands above its eyes. It can live to be over 60 years old. It pairs for life, and for life in this species means decades. Pairs separated by oceans during the non-breeding season return to the same nest, on the same cliff, in the same season, year after year, for as long as both partners are alive. The wandering albatross does not breed in Antarctica. It breeds further north, on South Georgia, on the Crozettes, on a remote British territory called Tristan da Cunha. It spends most of its life at sea, following the prevailing westerly winds around the Southern Ocean. It can circle the globe in 40 days. Some individuals have been tracked by satellite tag, covering 800,000 kilometers in a year. Albatross populations have been declining for decades. Longline fishing kills tens of thousands of birds a year. The birds dive for the bait, get hooked, are pulled underwater, and drown. When the passengers of the MV Hondius see a wandering albatross from the ship's railing, they are looking at one of perhaps 8,000 breeding pairs left on Earth. On the 20th of April, the ship begins her northward journey. By this point, 3 more passengers and 1 crew member have developed fevers. The next scheduled stop was South Georgia Island, a 170-kilometer arc of mountains in the South Atlantic, home to 200,000 king penguins and the abandoned remains of 7 whaling stations that processed over 175,000 whales between 1904 and 1965. It was also where Ernest Shackleton was buried. Shackleton died on board his ship, the Quest, anchored at South Georgia in the early hours of the 5th of January, 1922. His wife asked that he be buried where he died. His grave is the southernmost cemetery in the world, containing a person of widely known historical name. Cruise ship passengers traditionally toast his memory at the graveside. The MV Hondius did not stop at South Georgia. On the 22nd of April, the expedition leader announced the stop was cancelled. The widow's condition had deteriorated. The fastest route to a hospital was now through St. Helena, where the South African Air Force could dispatch a medical aircraft. The ship turned northeast. At Grytviken, the largest of the abandoned whaling stations on South Georgia, the king penguins continued their winter routines. 200,000 birds in a single colony, the 3rd largest king penguin colony on Earth. They stand in groups in the shallow water. They lay their eggs on their feet. They incubate them under a flap of belly skin called a brood pouch. The chicks, when they hatch, are covered in dense brown down that makes them look, for the first 6 months of their lives, like an entirely different species. The early naturalists who saw them in the 1800s named them woolly penguins and assumed they were not related to the adults at all. The colony will receive 8 other cruise ships in the same season the Hondius was meant to visit. The penguins will not know that one ship has turned away. St. Helena is a British overseas territory in the central South Atlantic, a volcanic island, 47 square miles, with a population of just over 4,000. For most of its history, it was reachable only by sea on a Royal Mail ship that ran between Cape Town and Jamestown on a 5-week cycle. An airport opened in 2017. It had taken a decade to build, at a cost to the British government of £285 million. It was meant to bring commercial air service to one of the most isolated, populated places on Earth. Instead, when the first test flight arrived, the pilot discovered that the prevailing winds across the runway produced a phenomenon called wind shear, invisible columns of vertical air that could push a landing aircraft sideways without warning. For nearly 2 years, no commercial airline would land at the airport. It was widely described in the British press as a national embarrassment. The wind problem was eventually mitigated by selecting smaller aircraft and adjusting the approach pattern. A weekly service from Johannesburg now operates. The runway is still considered, by every commercial pilot who flies it, to be one of the most challenging approaches in the world. St. Helena is, in modern memory, most famous as the place where Napoleon Bonaparte was held in exile after his defeat at Waterloo in 1815. He arrived on the 17th of October of that year and lived in a damp colonial residence on a windswept plateau for the next 5 years and 7 months. He died there on the 5th of May, 1821. Napoleon's exile defined St. Helena's modern identity. It also explains, in a roundabout way, why a Royal Air Force military runway exists on a tiny volcanic rock 800 miles further north. A runway that will become the only thing standing between a critically ill cruise passenger and his death. But we will come to that. On the 24th of April, the MV Hondius reaches St. Helena. The South African medical aircraft is already on the runway above, waiting. The widow is helped into a Zodiac, transferred to Jamestown Port, and driven by ambulance up the switchbacks to the airport. Her late husband's body is transferred with her. She is flown to Johannesburg. She does not survive the journey. She dies on arrival at Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital at 4:17 on the afternoon of the 26th of April. Her cause of death is recorded as acute respiratory distress syndrome. A blood sample is sent to the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in Sandton. By the 28th of April, the diagnosis is confirmed: Andes hantavirus. The MV Hondius, meanwhile, has continued north. She is now 4 days from Ascension Island. On board, the third case has just collapsed. Ascension Island is a volcanic teardrop in the central Atlantic, 8 degrees south of the equator. It is 1,600 kilometers from Africa, 2,250 from Brazil. It has no permanent inhabitants. By direct order of the British government, it has never had any. The roughly 800 people who live on the island today are all on work contracts. British and American military, technicians for satellite tracking stations, staff for the BBC World Service Atlantic Relay. Children are sometimes born on the island. They do not, by virtue of that birth, acquire any right to remain. The reason the island exists in this form is one of the strangest threads of consequence in modern history. In October of 1815, when the British exiled Napoleon to St. Helena, the Royal Navy did the geographic mathematics carefully. St. Helena was small and defensible, but it was 800 miles from the nearest other land. Any rescue attempt by Napoleon's remaining loyalists would have to come from somewhere. The candidates were limited. Ascension Island, 800 miles northwest of St. Helena, was the only other piece of land within reach. It was uninhabited. It was strategically located. If the French could place a base on it, they would have an island from which a rescue fleet could be launched. The British did the obvious thing. They occupied Ascension. They put a small garrison there and declared the island His Majesty's ship, Ascension. From that moment, no foreign power was allowed near it. The garrison was meant to be temporary. It became permanent. After Napoleon's death in 1821, the strategic purpose evaporated. But the British had by then realized the island sat astride one of the most important shipping lanes between Europe and South America. It was useful as a coaling station. It was useful as a base for monitoring the South Atlantic. The garrison stayed. In the 1860s, the Eastern Telegraph Company arrived and laid an undersea cable through the island. In 1942, during the Second World War, the United States arrived. They needed a stopover for transatlantic flights between Florida and West Africa. They built an airstrip across a volcanic plateau called Wide Awake, named after the colony of sooty terns that nested on the surrounding lava fields. The terns are still there, 200,000 pairs of them. the largest sooty tern colony in the Atlantic Ocean. They lay a single egg directly on the bare volcanic rock in shallow scrapes between cinder cones, and they raise their chicks in the deafening shared roar of the colony, a sound described by early sailors as a continuous, wakeful cry, which is why the British called the birds wide-awakes and named the plateau after them. The terns do not migrate by the calendar. They migrate by an internal cycle that runs every 9.5 months. They arrive at wide-awake from somewhere over the central Atlantic, breed for 3 months, leave for 6 months, and return. Where they go in the off-season is, after a century and a half of observation, still not fully understood. They have been tracked to the equatorial Atlantic. Beyond that, they disappear into the open ocean. The airstrip stayed. It was expanded. By the Falklands War in 1982, it was the central staging base for the British task force flying south. The airbase that helped win the Falklands War was, in a real sense, the airbase Napoleon's potential escape from St. Helena had brought into being. Today, the runway at Wide-Awake is the only piece of military-grade tarmac in 4,000 miles of central South Atlantic Ocean. The Royal Air Force operates regular flights from Brize Norton through Ascension onward to the Falklands. The Americans share the base, a NASA satellite tracking station, a GPS ground antenna, an Air Force orbital debris observatory. British Signals Intelligence operates a listening post on a hill called Cat Hill. 800 people, 25 named installations, 1 runway. On the morning of the 24th of April, 2026, the onboard physician of the MV Hondius transmits a teleconference request to Oceanwide's Operations Centre, the Royal Air Force Command at Brize Norton, and the British Foreign Office. A third passenger is critically ill, symptoms identical to the deceased Dutch husband. Fever, acute respiratory distress, blood pressure crashing. The patient is a Swiss national in his early 60s. He cannot be treated on board. He needs an intensive care unit within 48 hours. The teleconference identifies the only viable option. At 10:09 on the morning of the 27th of April, an Atlas A400M military transport aircraft takes off from the runway at Wide-Awake Airfield. It carries the Swiss passenger. It is bound for Air Force Base Waterkloof in Pretoria. The passenger has been transferred to the aircraft in a Trexler isolator, a transparent biocontainment enclosure designed in the 1950s to handle smallpox cases, reactivated for high-consequence infectious diseases. The flight is 4.5 hours. The Swiss passenger survives it. He is admitted to a biocontainment unit at Steve Biko Academic Hospital in Pretoria. He will, over the following 2 weeks, recover. He is the only one of the Hondius's confirmed Andes virus cases who will. He is also the moment the world finds out. The aircraft's arrival in South Africa is logged by international flight trackers. By the evening of the 27th, the BBC has confirmed that a passenger from a Dutch cruise ship has been medically evacuated from Ascension with an unknown serious illness. By the morning of the 28th, the Associated Press is reporting on 3 deaths and an active outbreak. By the 2nd of May, the World Health Organization has issued its global alert. What stands at the center of this chain is a single piece of infrastructure that exists where it exists because of a French emperor's surrender 211 years ago. If Napoleon had not been exiled to St. Helena, there would have been no British garrison on Ascension, no coaling station, no telegraph relay. No reason for the Americans to choose this island for their wartime airstrip. No expansion of the runway during the Falklands War. No A400M aircraft cycling weekly through Bryce Norton, Ascension, and the Falklands. No surface in the central South Atlantic capable of receiving a heavy military transport on short notice. The chain holds. It usually holds. The runway is here because of Napoleon. The medical evacuation is possible because the runway is here. The Swiss passenger survives because the medical evacuation is possible. But the chain also reveals what is and is not being caught. Andes hantavirus has been circulating in Colilago populations of southern Patagonia for at least several thousand years. Outbreaks among rural farmers, foresters, and indigenous communities have been documented in Argentina and Chile for the better part of 3 decades. Epuyén killed 11 people in a town of 3,000 and did not, in any meaningful sense, become a global story. The MV Hondius outbreak, 3 deaths, smaller in scale than Epuyén by a factor of nearly 4, produced a global health alert, a CDC-level 3 emergency response, and a media event that covered every continent. The difference is not the virus. The difference is the patients. 23 nationalities, a luxury cruise vessel, 3 governments' worth of patient confidentiality. The same surveillance system that did not stop Epuyén in 2018 and did not stop the unnamed agricultural deaths of 2020 in 3 Argentine provinces, and did not stop the Native American deaths in 1993 until the elders explained the rains. That surveillance system caught the Hondius within 26 days because the wrong people got sick. Maria van Kerkhove, the World Health Organization's Director for Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness, will hold a press briefing on the 8th of May. She will explain that the global risk from this outbreak is low. She will note that human-to-human transmission of Andes virus requires close, prolonged contact. She will praise the speed of the international response. What she does not need to say, because every public health official listening will already know it, is that the rats in the southern Patagonian forests are still there. On the 10th of May, British paratroopers of the 16 Air Assault Brigade jumped from a low-flying A400M onto Tristan da Cunha, the most remote inhabited island on Earth. Tristan has 220 residents. They share 8 surnames. The island has no airstrip, never had one, the terrain doesn't allow it, and the nearest hospital capable of treating advanced infectious disease is in Cape Town, 2,400 kilometers east. The only way to reach Tristan from the outside world is by sea, on a research vessel that calls once every 6 weeks. The Hondius had stopped at Tristan as a shore excursion landing in mid-April. One of the passengers, an elderly woman from Surrey, had bought a pot of honey at the tiny island gift shop and posted a photograph of herself with the local hospital's nursing officer. 3 weeks later, the woman was hospitalized in Britain with a fever. The Royal Air Force had to assume the photograph meant exposure. The paratroopers carry biocontainment equipment. They are met by the island's 12 police officers and the entire adult medical staff of the local hospital, 3 people. The patient tests negative. The same day, the MV Hondius docks at Tenerife in the Canary Islands. Spain has agreed to receive her. The remaining passengers disembark into a closed biocontainment corridor. 18 Americans are flown to the National Quarantine Unit at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha and observed for 42 days. None of them develop symptoms. The ship, now empty of passengers, continues north. She arrives at the port of Rotterdam at 4:30 in the morning on the 18th of May. She is disinfected, every surface swabbed, every air handling system purged, the carpets removed, the mortuary refrigeration dismantled and replaced. In 2 weeks, she will sail again. The next voyage, a polar cruise starting from Vlissingen on the 5th of June, has not been cancelled. Bookings, according to ocean-wide expeditions, remain strong. The price is unchanged. 3 dead, 11 cases worldwide. Investigators at the Malbrán Institute in Buenos Aires are still trapping rodents in Ushuaia. They have not, as of the closing of this documentary, identified a definitive source. In the cold forests outside El Bolson, in the wet southern beach valleys of Tierra del Fuego, in the long evenings of southern Patagonia, where the wind comes off the Andes and the temperature drops 20 degrees between sunset and midnight, the colilago continues. It eats, it nests, it breeds, it dies. The virus passes between generations of small, soft, harmless-looking forest mice who have no idea that they carry one of the most lethal pathogens known to medicine. The next El Niño, when it comes, will bring heavy rain. The seeds will be abundant. The colilago population will explode. Some proportion of the new generation will carry Andes virus. Some proportion of them will encounter a human. In Ushuaia, the Relleno Sanitario continues to receive 150 tons of waste a day. The condors continue to descend from the mountains. The birders continue to visit. Nobody has been able to prove that anything dangerous happens there. Nobody has been able to prove that it doesn't. Dr. Li Ho Wang isolated Hantan virus 3 decades after the first soldiers got sick. The Navajo elders told the CDC about a teaching that had been waiting in oral history for 100 years. The Epuyen outbreak happened in a town that was not, prior to that year, considered a hantavirus risk area. These viruses sit in their reservoir hosts for a long time. The chain of transmission is unbroken. They reach the wider human world only at intervals, and only when the conditions align. Heavy rain, an exploded rodent population, a person in the wrong place, a series of close contacts that propagates an outbreak before the surveillance systems catch it. The world watched the MV Hondius for 6 weeks. The world is not watching the colilago. The world is not watching most of the rodent species across 4 continents that carry one or another strain of this virus family. The world is watching cruise ships now in a way it was not watching them in early April. The next outbreak will not be a cruise ship. We do not know what it will be. We do not know when it will come. We know only that the chain has been unbroken for a very long time, that the rats are still in the forest, and the forest is still where it has always been, and a colilago, somewhere in southern Patagonia, is at this exact moment alive and infectious and unaware of any of this. On the 5th of June, the MV Hondius will leave Rotterdam. She will turn south, eventually, toward Patagonia, for another season of polar expedition cruises. Her next group of passengers will arrive in Ushuaia in late October. Some of them, on their day before embarkation, will visit the Relleno Sanitario to look for the Andean condor. The condors will be there. The birders will be there. The colilago will be in the forests above the city, where it has always been. What the visitors carry away with them, and what they do not carry away with them, is, as it has been for the past 70 years, a question the world's surveillance systems will only learn the answer to in retrospect. Thanks for watching. Until the next journey.